All right, we're live again for episode 2 of MarksWood 35. Hello, everybody. Hello, Mr. Joseph. How are you tonight?
I'm doing swell. How are you?
Quite swell myself.
Oh,
So, especially with this whole infamous topic that we're attacking, the whole mirrorless versus DSLR battle.
we're gonna solve it tonight.
Yes, we are actually.
It's over after this show.
That's right. I hope.
Call DP Review and tell them to post it up there. It's gonna be solved.
That's right. Because everybody knows you should go with DSLR instead of mirrorless, so that's why it's over.
We'll see.
All right, so to start things off,
maybe.
Right now, I currently shoot with a DSLR as my primary camera, and you currently shoot with a mirrorless.
And it's a pretty good comparison here because you've been on DSLR pretty much the whole time.
Yes,
a brief stint in mirrorless, and I've been on mirrorless pretty much the entire time, except for my brief stint with the DSLR. So
right. Yeah, so this will be a good. So I'll let you start off with what you think. I guess we'll start in, when do you think like that deciding moment was where everyone on DSLR started these mirrorless cameras started gaining traction and got everybody's attention? Like when did that start, and what do you think caused all that?
I think Sony was a big part of that. Because before, it was sort of like this micro four thirds, and nobody really knew what that was. Like, what's a micro four thirds sensor? I mean, what is a four thirds? It's not APS-C. It's smaller than that. It's not even close to full frame. It's just a little bit bigger than point and shoots, So it's sort of like nobody really saw that as a serious thing, and nobody had a lot of lenses, and everything just seemed really kind of like a toy camera sort of. And then Sony came along, and they threw APS-C sensors in there. There were, I guess, it was originally the NEX line.
Yeah, and there were APS-C sensors and cameras that were like this big.
Yeah, they were still tiny. So I think once Sony kind of got into the game, I think that's when it kind of took it up a notch. Not that Olympus hasn't been doing good. I think Olympus sort of pioneered a lot of it, for what I understand. But I think Sony was the ones that started changing the games. And then once notable photographers started switching, and they started, I don't know if maybe Sony sent them some cameras and like, here, try this out. And they got hooked on them or what, but people started switching, and then once they did that, and then I think Trey Ratcliffe was probably one of the big ones, whether you love him or hate him. I think, at some point he made that mirrorless versus DSLR video on his YouTube channel, and it kind of pushed people in either direction.
Yeah, it caused a lot of anger as well.
Yes, a lot of unneeded anger because it's just photography.
Exactly.
Not the presidential race 2016. This is this is just photography. And like we both said, the best thing right now is that we're living in the best time because we have the most amazing choices of cameras that are out there. No matter what you go with, you're going to be happy with it. So
yeah.
But I've had way more experience with mirrorless rather than DSLR, and I don't think I'll be going back unless somebody gives me a DSLR for free.
Yeah. Well, I think what I always thought was interesting, since I've always used DSLR, what kind of pulled me in was that what's so interesting about the companies that are making the mirrorless versus the DSLR is that DSLRs have been made by different companies, since they became a thing, and they've all pretty much been the same. Like if you look at a Nikon DSLR, they have pretty much the same buttons and the same functions as the Canon DSLRs, and same with other companies' DSLRs. But what I think is interesting is that these companies that are coming out with mirrorless cameras are all taking a very different approach, which is kind of cool. So you actually, when you jump from like a Sony mirrorless to a Fuji mirrorless, Sony is going with like crazy high technology and their very own look as far as cosmetics go. And then Fuji is like trying to take it back to the rangefinder Leica look of things. Yeah. So yeah, you get all these really different options. And I think that mirrorless cameras kind of brought the fun back into photography for a lot of people.
I think so too. I mean, it's when you kind of have a little playground that you can kind of, you don't have like all of your users on it. You can sort of have fun with it. It's like when Apple makes like the MacBook Air before they had done anything. They charged $3,000. They knew nobody was really going to buy it at that time, but it was sort of like their playground. Right. And that's sort of how mirrorless has been, where it's like Sony still makes their DSLR and DSLT lines, but they kind of started playing around with this other little thing called this mirrorless camera. And then as it started to get, years have passed, all of a sudden everyone's like, whoa, okay, this is actually really insane. And so, yeah, it does have the allure of being the newer, the cooler, the hipper, the newer technology, and DSLR now has the sort of stigma of being more, if you're an old traditional photographer, then you'll go buy boring old DSLR and take your old boring pictures. We're over here with the new technology and the new wave of the future. That seems to be what both sides think they're on right now. So
yeah, it's true. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely seeing a trend. Like we're both pretty much techie geeks, and so we love keeping up with all this stuff. But I think that's a big reason why Trey Radcliffe switched too, because I've watched him talk on Google before, or on like a TED talk, and he said stuff like that. You know, before he got into photography, he was like in computer programming, and he was a computer nerd. So I think, yeah, like you said, all this kind of younger generation is really intrigued by the technology that this stuff offers, and the fact that these mirrorless cameras were the first cameras to have Wi-Fi and NFC and make it easy to go from camera to smartphone to Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. That's a huge selling point for our generation, because social media is one of the biggest aspects of photography in general right now.
Oh yeah, yeah. And if you look at sort of like the major DSLRs, they don't get updated as frequently as these mirrorless cameras do.
Yeah.
And so you get hooked on a DSLR and you stick with it for like half a decade. And then eventually, once they've really updated that to a big one or to a major update, then you upgrade to that one. And so that's sort of the cons that the mirrorless people would say. Of course, the cons of mirrorless is that by the time you get your mirrorless and you get hooked on it, they've released a new one that has, way more features and, focuses in twice the amount of time, has 3 times the more focus points, has better video, and you're like, well, then why the heck did I buy this one?
Right.
And so it does kind of hard to keep up with the changing rate of the mirrorless. But
and that's one thing. I wonder if eventually it will slow down, but that's what's scaring, I think, people like me right now that has so much invested into a DSLR setup with lenses, is that, if I go and sell all of my Nikon gear and start on a Sony or whatever, next week they could have all new stuff and my stuff could be just completely cannibalized. So it's scary.
Sony likes doing that. They love their proprietary stuff, and they love the memory stick duo cards, and finally there's they had their own specific. I remember I think it was the 5R that had a very specific Sony hot shoe.
Yeah. And
so like the only things I could get had to be like Sony made type of things, which are always, when you have less choice, they cost more. So it was like, so finally they're starting to come around a little bit. But yeah, it is. And I guess that's another pro of the DSLRs, is that they've been around for so long that they've perfected everything. Now they're just doing small iterations, sort of like Apple with some of their products. They've been making the same MacBook, silver aluminum thing for so long that now they're just doing small iterations over it. And with the mirrorless, they've been changing at such a rapid pace. They're going to hit a point in the next couple of years where they're not going to be adding an extra 120 focus points. They're just going to be small iterations, and maybe at that point they might move to like a 2-year cycle or something like that.
Yeah, that would be smart, because that's what I think is stopping all the people that have got so much invested in one thing, which is why so many people are all the professionals that haven't completely switched. A lot of them are just kind of playing with the mirrorless cameras as a second body with just like a couple lenses. I've seen that a million times. I love to watch the like the what's in my camera bag videos on YouTube, and all these guys will have like their Nikon or their Canon, and then they'll say, and for the weekends I have this little Sony a6000 or the Sony a7R, and they'll pull out these mirrorless cameras and with a couple lenses, and they're playing with them, which is what I did before I got the Sony a7R and the a7R II. I got the I think my first one might have I can't remember. Did I ever? I've owned so many. Did I ever own an A6000? I can't even remember now. Somewhere in the mix.
You were going. Well, did you get it or not? I know you were going to get it at one point, because it was going to be your. No, I don't think you ever got one.
Okay, I never. Yeah, I can't remember which one. I started on some Sony that was less expensive than the full frames, and I don't know which one it was. And then I finally got the A7R, which I loved. And so the biggest thing I noticed when I switched the first time, which I think is a big con right now in mirrorless, but they're getting better, is that the lens choices are significantly worse with mirrorless versus DSLR, because they're just new.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. When I first got my NEX 5R, I mean, I wanted the 51.8 Sony camera or Sony lens, and that thing was like $400 or $500 or something like that. I could afford that. I mean, I just barely saved up to get the 5R and the kit lens that came with it, and now I've got to save up almost more than that just to get one lens that I like. And you could go with like, I think Olympus probably has Olympus or Panasonic have the largest selection of lenses at the time, and I think even now they still do. So they're definitely getting better, and Sony's getting better now that Sigma is making some lenses for the E mount of Sony, and so it is getting better. But yeah, they definitely are.
So that brings up a good point. So there's a company called Rokinon or Rokinon, however you want to say it.
Oh yeah.
And that's like that Japanese or Chinese company, one of the two. And what are your thoughts on, because they make really good, cheap manual lenses, but they're full manual, they're no autofocus. What, would you do something like that, like for yourself, or would you think that you'd still rather have an AF? I mean, if you could get like, because they're selling everything like 1.4 apertures at like $300.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, I think for that cost, you would definitely want to at least try it. But you're sort of taking away one of the major advantages of the Sony, series, and that is their like 7,000 focus points that they have. They can literally track people's faces, remember their face. They can walk away for 5 minutes, come back, and it refocuses on their face.
This is true.
And I've used that focusing where you just choose a person and it just stays on it whenever I'm doing photography, whether I'm at church or somewhere else, and with my nephews or something, and that's pretty stellar. But if you're like, I mean, certainly if you're out in nature and you're going around and you're taking photos, like if you go hiking or something like that, then autofocus doesn't become a major point unless you're shooting wildlife. So it would definitely be worth it, especially if you want to get that killer bokeh that the 1.4 can give you. So, and for the price, it'd definitely be worth it. But that is sort of like taking away one of the major selling points.
That's true. I think it would probably be more of a killer thing for video, people that are buying it for video.
Yeah, video would be good, because video autofocus is good, but in video you want to get that kind of like out of focus back into focus style, and you can't do that with autofocus. And so almost every time I shoot video, I'm virtually always in manual. So and especially with focus peaking now, you can still probably get to the point where you can focus super quick manually anyway. I mean, there are a lot of people that only do manual focus, and so that's not really a big hang up for them. So
so I think another thing with so like comparing DSLR to mirrorless other than lenses is some people just prefer the size and weight of the DSLR, because like me, I have big hands, and so I've noticed, I think I actually talked about this earlier today, that these mirrorless cameras are slowly getting bigger. They're adding like bigger grips, they're making them a little thicker. And so what's weird is at first, I think that was one of the biggest selling points to a lot of people, was how small they are. And so now they're like the A7R II, I owned it for a few weeks, and it's pretty chunky for a mirrorless camera. But so what are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think that because the technology is the biggest selling point now, that they're just going to kind of say, well, since people love the technology, maybe we'll just give them what they want and make them just as big as DSLRs? Or do you still think they're trying to compete size-wise?
Yeah, that's a good question, because you could say weight. There are two camps that will say that the size and weight of a DSLR is the pro and the con. Some people love having that weight because they've been used to it, and it gives them a good grip. You feel like you can hold it really well. And then there are people that pick up a mirrorless, and like you said, you can fill your half a quarter of your bag with all of your mirrorless gear that normally would carry like all of your gear for your DSLR. So you either love the weight or you don't. And making it small, you do have that you either do like what the RX100 does, where you just like throw in the largest sensor into the smallest body that you can, and that's a big selling point because people can just like throw it in any bag they have. But yeah, I think that is one of their big points, and I think they do need to kind of keep it at least fairly small to keep that selling point big, because otherwise, if over time it does get as big as a DSLR, well then what's the point of it being mirrorless other than a couple other features?
That's what I was wondering, because when I got because I had the A7R and then I had the A7R II, and I was like, man, just holding them, in either hand was a huge difference as far as weight. And I mean, because I shot DSLR, I wasn't complaining, so the A7R II felt great. Like ergonomically, it was great. The grip was good, but it's just it's weird to see some of these brands getting bigger. So it makes you wonder where they're going to stop.
Yeah, hopefully they'll kind of stay the size that they are, maybe if not over time get a little bit smaller. But there's just, I mean, physics only allows certain things, I mean, if you want to have, a viewfinder, a big screen, a big sensor, and all these various things inside of them, you can only make the camera so small before you start running out of space. And if you look at like, you know, smartphones now, they're trying to get as small as they possibly can. Physics just don't allow that. And that's why there's rumors of Apple getting rid of the 3.5 millimeter jack, because they just need like millimeters more space inside for extra stuff. I mean, so with mirrorless, you either are got to make it smaller or, you know, embrace the size and just keep adding new features at the cost of making it a little bit bigger.
Right. I agree. So then I think we would both agree, even though I shoot DSLR, you shoot mirrorless right now, that there doesn't really need to be a battle. There's all these people are all the time are just, it always has to be one of or the other, like a fight to the death. But we should all coexist in this awesome artistic world and not. I mean, you know, there's so many people that are just out there to cut other people's work down just for trying to be unique. And it's like, you know, if you can get it done with an iPhone versus a $4,000 camera, then more power to you. You know, whatever you feel comfortable shooting with is the way to go. And I mean, there's going to be people that like different stuff. And me and you've seen it a million times on DP review forums or whatever. There's this guy that has his DSLR, and if you try to tell him anything different, or if you do any editing whatsoever on your photo, oh, you're not a professional. You're not like the guys that can just take a perfect photo immediately and print it at 40 by 60 and be done with it.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Yep. So yeah,
another pro of the DSLR that I've mentioned to you is that if you need a new lens and you're out antiquing, you can just go into any antique store and just find any old lens that's 100 years old, you know? So
yeah, exactly. But see, I don't have to contact NASA and fly to space to get my lens. So yeah, you know, whenever you want to go to Mars and get your new 70 to 200 2.8, let me know.
That's right. We'll see you over here in the future.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of that, I got a new lens this week. I got my 100 millimeter, 105 millimeter prime lens macro.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's really sweet. The minimum focus distance is like just under 12 inches, so you can get super close. And yeah, it's really, really awesome. But it's so heavy. So that was one thing that when I got it, I was like, gosh, that's one thing I do miss about the mirrorless thing. Because when you have the D810 with a huge prime, I mean, look how thick that thing is compared to the body. I mean, it's just so.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast today. Actually, when you showed me the video from Adorama of that guy who does Instagram and Little Coles, and he was on a podcast that he had linked on his Instagram profile. So I went to that podcast. It was the hashtag, I think is what it's called. And I listened to a couple of them because it's all photographers on Instagram, which was really cool. And I listened to 3. They all had Sony A7s. They were all like, every single one of them were talking about their Sony, you know. They're like, in one of them, he was like, have you gotten your Sony yet? I'm getting my Sony soon. And it's like, I mean, among all these young people, I mean, they weren't all young, but youngish type of photographers, you know, I mean, those Sonys are absolutely blowing up right now. And
they are.
I was like, I got the A7 and I can fit it in my pocket. I mean, it's like, it's tiny. And it's like, when you've been using these massive DSLRs, you know, it is nice. But I think it is always funny whenever you see the people that are like, they're so excited because you can get a Sony and you can put any lens from any, you know, manufacturer, and they'll get like the NEX F3 or the NEX 3N, and they'll put like this massive DSLR lens on there.
Right.
The lens weighs like 4 times more than their body.
I know, I see that all the time.
I'm like, that's not a selling point to me.
I know.
You know, I mean, you look kind of like a weirdo in that. So.
Well, especially since only recently, in the past 6 months, has that even worked well. Like when it first came out with the adapters, you might as well just do manual focus, because the autofocus took like an extra 5 seconds to lock onto anything.
Oh yeah.
And there was even some adapters where you actually lose a full stop of light in between the adapter and the lens, which is just bonkers to me. I would never want to go from like my 2.8 lens to an f4 just for an adapter.
Well, and like the good adapters, like when I had the 5R and I wanted to get all the Minolta lenses that you could get on the Sony A series, their DSLTs, I wanted hold on, I just activated Siri on my phone over there. Let's see if it just goes away. Their A mount to E mount adapter was $250.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And I mean, obviously it's come down in cost over time, and there have been other people that have made other ones. But I mean, that you want to get a first party one if you can, because you know they've guaranteed that it'll hopefully work well. But At that point, just just buy another lens.
I know. Yeah, it's true. I mean, yeah. So, yeah, definitely. When it comes down to it, I think they're both good for different things and different people. Like I think that landscape photographers like me kind of jumped on them first because we don't really need speed. We don't have to have fast autofocus and fast everything. We're, it's okay if we take an extra few seconds to fiddle within the menus and get stuff. But the main reason why I decided to switch back from mirrorless to DSLR was just, believe it or not, for the speed, because I never realized how much I needed all of the regular settings at my fingertips. Because like I have a button for ISO, a button for exposure compensation, a button for bracketing, and every time I needed to do something like that in the A7R, I would either have to assign a function button where I'd have to like reach over my shoulder and get touch a function button, or dig through 3 or 4 menus. So that was probably the biggest thing that annoyed me about them.
Yeah, that's where some companies like the what was it? I think the Panasonic that I was really looking at almost bought the LX100. I mean, it's a fixed lens, but it was pure manual controls. There was no auto on it. Like you couldn't even shoot auto unless you like did some special weird thing to set the combinations, press these buttons. And so and of course Fuji is really good at having all their manual controls on there, like the old school cameras. And
absolutely,
yeah, Sony is one of those. They don't like putting more buttons on there. They'll have like the little rotating thing at the very top, to change the aperture. But again, it's like one of those things where I've been on so many Sony cameras, I can fly through those menus like it was nothing.
Yeah.
But you get used to what you have, and I'm sure if you had more manual controls, that would be easier to do by far. Once you learn how to do manual and you shoot all manual,
right?
Since you showed me that one little trick when we were at the Mockingjay or whatever.
Oh yeah, Sweetwater Creek.
Yeah, when we were there. Yeah, it's now that you only shoot full manual, I've got it down now, and it seems fine to me. But once you get shown something that's better and easier, then you're like, oh well, then I like this better. So
right.
Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah. Now a big thing, and this is something that I just found out this week. So I do a lot of, or at least I try to do a lot of YouTube videos on like photography education stuff, and I'm using an old Canon, I think it's like a 1/4-inch sensor video camera. So it has decent quality in well-lit situations, but in low lighting, basically anything indoors, it's really, really noisy. It's really grainy. And so I've been looking for a new video camera. And so all these things I've been looking at is I wanted to look at like DSLRs or mirrorless cameras, and all of them top out at like 29 minutes of recording. And I wanted something where I could stick in like a 64 gigabyte card and just go until the card ran out.
Yeah.
And this is one cool thing that I just found out this week about Panasonic cameras. So all of Sony mirrorless, all of Fuji mirrorless, all of Olympus mirrorless, they all top out at either like 25 or 29 minutes of recording. But the Panasonic GH4 and the GH3 both go to 4 hours of 4K recording.
Oh yeah, we do. At our church, we have a couple of video guys. Almost exclusively GH4s are what they shoot on. It's Sony's. They have some Sony like actual video cameras, sort of like the one you just got.
Yeah.
And then they have a lot of GH4s. I mean, that is just by far the GH4 has like been one of those that has busted out and is just dominating video. And yeah, everyone seems to really love that.
Yeah. And so that's where I wonder if, and I think one of the reasons, other than 4K, obviously, that I think they're ruling is that. Of course, it's moderately priced for a 4K camera like that, but the fact that you can record over 29 minutes. So I wonder if this is just like a firmware thing that other camera companies could do, or if it literally, it starts burning the sensor. Because on all the other cameras I've used, at like 29 minutes, it'll actually say sensor temp warning is what it will give me, like temperature warning. Then it'll just shut off, and I have to wait a few minutes. And so somehow Panasonic has managed this, and maybe it's because they're using the Micro Four Thirds sensor. It's a much smaller sensor to manage. I don't know.
That's true. It may be. Yeah, I don't know if maybe they figured something out, or yeah, it may be the 4/3 sensor because they seem hooked on that 4/3 sensor, and so does Olympus. And
right.
So hey, if you can get. I mean, there are some pictures that people take on the 4/3, and it looks incredible. I mean, again, it just comes down to like when you take pictures. If you have a good camera nowadays, it doesn't matter if it's a 4/3 sensor, 1-inch sensor, or if you don't want like smaller than 1 inch, but full frame APS-C, whatever. If it takes a good picture, sometimes you can't tell. I mean,
right.
you know, there are some people on Instagram that take insane pictures with their iPhone, and you know, like Austin Mann, who took that photo in Iceland, and then Apple called him and was like, "Hey, can we use your photo as a series we're doing called Shot on iPhone?" He was like, "Yeah, sure." And then they made this massive, you know, poster for New York or something like that. So
Man. Yeah. What do you say to that when Apple calls you? Yeah, I guess so. Why not?
yeah, that's what it's crazy. There's a lot of stories because Apple loves photography, and they I think one of their backgrounds was used. They found a photo on 500px, and I think it was the one for the iOS 8 background that was like the mountain with the stars. I think they took it from 500px and asked the guy if they could use it. And,
Yeah, that's super cool. So yeah, so I think at the end of the day, I think we agree that mirrorless DSLR shouldn't really be a camera versus camera. They do different things. They can both accomplish the same thing. They both take pictures. Lay off on the whole battle.
Everything's amazing.
Right.
I mean, you don't have bad cameras now. You just have bad photographers usually. So.
Yeah, exactly. That's what people still don't get. I still love it every time someone comes up to me like, "Man, you have such a nice camera." And I always say, like, you know, would you go into like a restaurant, you know, and be like, "Man, I bet you that guy has some killer pots and pans in the back because this is the best steak I've ever had."
Yeah, I was listening to some photography podcasts, and they told some little story. It's a fictional story of two guys meet up in the park, and they're both taking photos, and one guy's an amateur photographer and one's a professional. Professional has all the great gear, and amateur's like, "Man, I wish I could take great pictures, you know, but you've got all that great gear, so you know, my pictures won't be that good." And he goes, "Well, how about we do this? How about we switch gear? Go away for an hour and come back, and whoever has the best photos gets to keep all the gear." And he goes, "No, I don't think so," because he knew that he's a professional photographer. If you're good, it doesn't matter what gear you have; you're going to take good photos. So it's, you know, the best.
That's right.
With you, so
it's very true. So okay, so then that's we'll just lay that to bed for now. That's, you know, there doesn't need to be a battle. This is a great time to get into photography because it's so easy and affordable to get into good cameras these days. Because I think we both agree, even the iPhone is a phenomenal camera to start off on. It's great. So let's talk about what full frame versus the crop sensor.
Let's do it.
Another big battle. So again, you have a mirrorless crop sensor, and I have a DSLR full frame. Have you ever owned a full frame?
Never.
Okay, you have not.
Unless you consider film a full frame.
Okay, gotcha. Have you shot with one?
I have not.
Okay.
Well, no. When we went out to that weird place with that we first discovered. Yes, Soap Creek.
Okay.
I used your what was it? Mark III, I think.
Oh, the 5D. Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
So I think I used that when we went out there.
Okay.
Other than that, no, I have not had. I would like a full frame.
Right, but you know a lot about them. So what do you think is, you know, pros and cons of both? Like, so what would you say are benefits of your crop sensor, like right off the bat?
Well, benefit and con that I figured out now is that if you want more of a zoom, you don't have to buy, like, you know, if you want an 85mm equivalent zoom, you have a crop sensor. So if you get a 50mm, it's really a true 85mm roughly zoom. And so that's definitely pretty good if you want to do that. But that's, to me, is also the con, because I've been using my 50mm and I feel like I have to get so far away from people to get a good portrait shot. And I'm like, because I even asked you the other day, I'm like, this is so annoying. I don't know why I have to keep getting back just to get a really good portrait. And you're like, well, because you're shooting with like an 85, really.
Right.
I was like, oh, yeah. Well, dang it. So that, to me, is one of the cons. You know, but obviously they're going to be a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And they're getting a little bit better, especially the Sony sensors. So they're getting better for low light, but they still can't touch a full frame when it comes to low light.
Right. Yeah, that's probably my biggest con that I found is the low light, you know, difference between cropped and Nikon, which I'm curious to see how this new Nikon D500 kind of fares into this mix, because that has an ISO range of 100 all the way up to 1.6 million.
That's insane.
Yeah, for a cropped body. So I want to see if that actually performs good at, like, that means that if it's 1.6 million, then it might perform good up to like 25,600, which is still unbelievable.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So I'm curious to see actual test photos hit the market before I decide to pre-order or buy that, because that's the only other one I'm looking at. But I think we discussed last week, it's just so tough to wrap my head around spending $2,000 on a crop sensor body.
Yeah, that would have to be insane low light capabilities. I mean, it is getting to the point where with shooting in RAW and with software, you can really get rid of a usable amount. But even I've found I shoot in RAW. I take a lot of photos in relatively dark times, like when we're in church and we're singing or something like that. It's dark outside of the stage, and when I try and bring out some shadows, some noise, even shooting at like 2000 ISO, when I pull out the shadows a little bit, I'm still seeing some noise. And then when I throw it into noiseless, it does get rid of some of that noise, but then it also, you know, makes it a little bit more of a painterly type of look, you know, where you're losing a lot of the details. So I would kill to have. Even looking at the D700, I think it was that you told me like is now $400 or $500. Even though that camera's like, you know, 50 years old, it's still a full frame, and it still rates way better than almost any APS-C sensor. So
they just I mean, as simple as this: big, you know, bigger sensor, better low light, better depth of field. But here's kind of an interesting thing when we're talking about the crop sensors and the low light is Sony with the A7 Mark II. Now that's a full frame, but that's when they introduced the internal 5-axis image stabilization. And so everyone thought we were going to see that on the new A6000, the A6300.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think they put it on there. And so that's what kind of killed it for me somewhat, because I was like, man, you know, that would allow people to shoot at like ISO 800 and then hand hold like a tenth of a second and be okay with it because it's got that in-body stabilization.
Exactly. If you can introduce these little tricks that can allow you, because you want to shoot with the lowest ISO and the fastest shutter speed if you can, depending on what you're doing. So if you can add these little tricks to, like, you know, because they're handheld, like when you go to shoot, it does stabilize it pretty well, you know, but you still have to be, you still can't, you know, lower the shutter speed too much or, you know, but yeah, if they had that stabilization, man, that would be, that definitely would be.
So there's one thing that I learned, it was a few years ago. There's a married couple, and they're professional landscape photographers. Their names are Verena and I think Jay Patel are their names. Okay. And they use full frame cameras, but for a lot of their big landscapes where they need like everything in focus is like this big, you know, vista or this big mountain range, they use a crop sensor camera, and they explained why they do that. And so have you ever heard, you know what hyperfocal distance is, right?
I've heard of it. I don't know really what it is.
So yeah, it's kind of a stupid like scientific thing that goes into what's in focus. And so basically it's tough to get to understand at first, but it's basically when, you know, depending on what aperture your camera is set on. So like for landscapes, you normally want to be like f11, f16, something like that, you know, and you think that should get you, you know, a good enough distance and focus. And so what the hyperfocal distance is based on your aperture. The hyperfocal distance is from the lens, however many feet in front of that, what's going to be in focus to infinity, to where the lens is. So, for example, depending on how far or close your foreground is, if there's like a rock in the immediate foreground, no matter what aperture, I can shoot at aperture 30, you know, f32, and my lens just isn't going to focus on anything that close. It might focus like 3 feet in front of the lens and then beyond. And so the crop sensors, having a smaller sensor, apparently minimizes and like closes the gap for depth of field, and it will just have like everything in focus. And so that's one pro that I've thought about shooting landscapes with crop sensors before, because the bigger the sensor gets, the more critical your focus has to be. That's how it is. Even like medium format cameras, how their sensors are like, you know, double the 35 millimeter. The focus is like absolutely critical. You can see all the flaws, much like how if megapixels get, you know, higher and higher, you can start to see all the imperfections in the image. So that's one big pro for landscape shooters I've heard, is that they don't have to worry so much about the math. There's like an iPhone app that'll tell you how many feet based on your aperture and shutter speed, you know, how many feet your foreground should be and stuff. And so with crop sensors, apparently you don't have to worry about that as much at all. You just, you know, rack your lens out to whatever focal length and shoot the shot, and everything's in focus, and you go home. So
crazy. But I guess it also means, or does that mean that on full frames you can get crazy bokeh?
Yes, exactly. So that's a pro and a con. So full frame, you get more bokeh, you get better depth of field. So when you shoot at 2.8, you get a crazy, you know, buttery smooth background. And with a crop sensor, it's not quite as smooth. You probably need like a 1.8 or a 1.4 to match the bokeh from the 2.8 of a full frame.
Yeah, I would like a full frame at some point.
Oh yeah,
that'd be killer.
Yeah,
if you end up buying an extra one and you're like, I don't really need this, you know, you can toss it my way and I'll gladly.
Yeah, I mean, if I end up buying the Nikon D5, if I buy the D500, I might just toss you the 810. You know, I don't know. Who knows? I might never use it again.
Don't even play around with me like that.
So, let's see. Any other big differences between the full frame and the crop? So we got low light, hyperfocal distance. Obviously, wildlife photographers and sports photographers, they rant and rave about the crop sensors because they'll put their big 400 millimeter 2.8 lenses, and it, you know, extends it by 1.5 crop.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, and it definitely gives you a little bit more of a zoom.
Right.
So that would definitely be killer.
Yeah,
and you get a smaller size.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
You know, you can if you want to go out shooting and you don't want to take your massive DSLR and all the lenses, and you just kind of want to be a little bit more casual, you can just grab your little crop sensor camera and just go out and either just carry it with one lens. Like I can take my A6000, put the little 16 to 50 power zoom on there, and it's like a little pancake lens. I mean, can't fit it in any pockets, but I could put it in my bag with my computer, and I would even feel it in there.
Right.
You know, so that is definitely nice with all the crop sensor cameras.
Definitely. So for anyone watching, maybe, you know, there's someone out there debating their first camera, crop sensor, full frame, whatever. Let's go ahead and quickly touch on this because it seems like everybody's first crop sensor camera is a Canon Rebel of some sort. T4i, T5i, something like that.
God, the T3i probably still sells for like $700. I mean, gosh. I can't tell you how many people I know have on Facebook or in text messages said, "What camera should I get?" And I go, "How much you spend?" And they say like, "Oh, $400 or $500." And I'm like, "Well, Sony has a bunch of, you know, mirrorless ones, or even if you get their DSLRs, or even the Nikon entry levels have good low light capabilities." And they're like, "I bought the T3i," and I was like, "I didn't even mention that. Why did you get that?" And I even sent them like comparisons about T3i doesn't win in any category whatsoever, color depth, dynamic range, anything.
I know.
You know, but they've just become the standard entry level DSLR. Good on them for doing that, but good Lord, it's just like, why?
I think there's probably something behind this because every single time I'm at any camera store, like Best Buy, Wolf Camera, there's a Showcase Atlanta here in Atlanta, Georgia, and every time I'm there, they always recommend it. You know, it's my first camera. What do you recommend? Oh, Canon T3i, T4i. And it's got to be that Canon lets these camera stores have this for such a low price that they can like triple their margin or something on this. And they're just like, look, I don't care what these people ask for. You give them the T3i.
It's just, I don't know why.
I don't get it.
You can even get like, because at our church we have one of our older cameras is the T1i.
Yeah.
It's like just as good as the T3i, and you can buy it for like $100 or less. It's like the same camera. Outside of like filming, like you can't get the 1080p, but as far as photography goes, the pictures, it is the same. And you can get the T1i, T2i for the same, and get it for like $400 less than any of the other T3i, T4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10i's, whatever they are. Yeah, I mean, all they're doing now is just adding Wi-Fi, taking away Wi-Fi, adding it back in the new one, and
just, I know. I don't get it. So let's just don't buy the Canon Rebels. I'm not trying to tell you what to buy, not to buy, but I can promise you for the same price, the Sony or Fuji, pretty much any mirrorless camera will give you way better image quality and better portability than any Canon Rebel. I promise.
And again, if you're a good photographer, it doesn't matter what you have. You know, you can make good pictures of anything. But if you're going to be shooting in auto for the most part, which they will, Sony's intelligent auto is fantastic. And so even the Nikon's entry levels, the D3300 and D3100s have way better low light capabilities.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, and they're still cheaper. And the only thing that is fairly good on the T3i is that it has in-body not stabilization, in-body a focus motor.
Oh, okay, focus motor, yeah.
Which the entry-level Nikons do not, which is highly frustrating. So
Yeah, that is true. Okay, so that's a good point, and it's probably not. A lot of people will say, "Oh, I'm about a T3i for video," but again, these mirrorless cameras are still they shoot in 1080p as well.
You said that in 2009.
Yeah,
you know, when it came out, yes, it was good at video when it first came out. We have moved past that. The iPhone has better video than that. Android phones have better video than that. You can go pick up a point and shoot that probably has better videos than that. I mean, so that's not an excuse anymore.
Yeah. Well, there's this video that I actually saw recently where these guys they titled their video, "Why does my iPhone 6s shoot better video than my $3,000 DSLR?" And so they had tons of views. And so they literally put 4K footage from the iPhone 6s and 4K footage from their DSLR side by side in Final Cut. And then you know how you can do like a 100% crop on the video? Well, they zoomed it in 100%, and the iPhone, you can see like across the street, these people like sitting at a coffee shop drinking, and you could see like the color of their clothes. You could tell if it was a boy or a girl, but like the DSLR, it just turned into like an 8-bit pixelated Game Boy game. Like you couldn't see anything. So yeah, it's crazy. So iPhone's a really good option for video. And there's no 29-minute limit. It's, you know, it's however big of an iPhone you get, 128 gig or whatever. So that's a huge selling point. Yeah, so anyway, I would stay away from the Canon Rebels. I would go Nikon or Sony or one of the other mirrorless cameras.
Absolutely.
Yep. And speaking of mirrorless, just quickly touching back on mirrorless again for a second. So recently, Fuji released their new mirrorless camera, the X Pro 2, which looks like an old Leica. Looks pretty cool. A lot of focus points. Sony did the A6300. Nikon, which we'll talk about in a second, did these new DL cameras.
Yep.
And then Canon, where's Canon at?
Selling T3i still.
That's right. I just don't get it, man.
Still
I don't know
what... I mean, they I guess they don't really have.
They have the EOS M, the M series.
Yeah, they have the M.
Right.
They have pretty good of the prosumer like point and shoots, like the G1X and
the G7X and stuff. Those are good.
Yeah, so those are pretty good. But yeah, they're. I mean, hey, if they're just not wanting to get into the mirrorless game that much, then you know, I mean, right now they're not really a player. Nikon has their, I guess, the V series or whatever, and they have like the V3 or something like that.
Yeah,
those weren't really that great. I mean, if you either embrace it full, go all out, or just let Sony and Olympus and Panasonic and Fuji sort of take over and
that's right,
making your high-end cameras good, because their 5D Mark III was like the most popular camera on Flickr for years. So
yeah.
They must have killer marketing or something. I don't know if it was their old Andre Agassi commercial or what, but they had some sort of marketing where people just think that you got to get a Canon. I don't know what it is, but I mean, I
don't get it.
Power to them, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Pretty much every event or wedding photographer I've ever seen has a Canon 5D Mark something. It's always a Canon.
Funny, those 5D Mark IIIs are everywhere. I mean, it's word of mouth that gets around, and everyone knows if you're going to be a professional photographer, you got to get a 5D Mark III. And they're great cameras. Their high-end cameras are really good, but
yeah,
I don't know what it is, man. They're just, at some point, they just became the standard.
Yeah. Oh, and you know, I think, and I just now remembered this. For the longest time, Nikon didn't have a good kit lens that came with their pro bodies. I don't remember what lens they attached onto it, but Canon had their 24-105 f4 with image stabilization as a lens to come with the 5Ds, and so that probably sold a lot more because that's a really good versatile zoom range, and it's got built-in stabilization.
It's a wedding lens right there, man.
It is. I used that lens when I had the 5D Mark III for weddings. I actually chose that over the 24-70 2.8 because the 24-105 was sharper.
Yeah. Dang, that'd be it. And that came with their full frame cameras?
Yeah, it was an offered bundle with the 5D Mark II or Mark III.
Jeez, that's a pretty killer kit lens.
Right. And so Nikon came out with their 24-120, but that was years later. This Canon 24-105 has been around forever, and it's just it's a killer lens for video and photo.
I would like to see that. I would like to see a nice trend in kit lenses starting to be really good. Like, what if everyone was like vying to have the best kit lens?
That would be amazing.
Like that would be pretty killer. Because Sony's their 16 to 50 power zoom is pretty good, but that's mainly because it gets down to this really tiny size when you turn it off. But yeah, that'd be a pretty nice little.
Yeah. Now I do, because I've been, I just researched forever about I still haven't purchased a second camera. I'm still, debating all the options. I've been looking into kit lenses, and so far, by far, I think the Fuji has said to have the best kit lens. They're 18 to 55 because I think it's a 1.8 to 2.8, or it's a 2.8 to f4. It's one of those two. Wow. Yeah, and all of the other ones are 3.5 to 5.6. And Fuji glass has always just been really good. Like, just Fuji non-lenses have been unbelievable. So I've just heard their kit lens is definitely one that people shoot with. And, typically if you get a kit lens, most people, once they upgrade, they just kind of throw it in the bag just to have it, but they don't really use it. So I've heard the Fuji 18 to 55 is pretty killer.
That'd be good. I mean, I pretty much, on the majority of my cameras, I've always used the kit lens, outside of maybe a couple where I bought maybe one more lens.
Right.
And I mean, it's like, a couple of Trey Ratcliffe videos, he would take these amazing photos. He's like, yeah, that was the kit lens with the A6000. And you're like, oh my gosh, Yeah. So, I mean, with the, they're not as bad now, but
yeah, I mean, and a lot of that too is, a lot of that too is proper technique. I mean, everything's in focus, the right aperture, the right post-processing. You don't want to destroy pixels and, just add all this. So yeah. Okay, so let's talk about, let me look them up here on my laptop so I can get the specs, but let's talk about these new Nikon DL cameras. So what do you think about those?
These are pretty cool.
Yeah.
These are definitely a kind of shot, I guess, at the RX100 and Sony's little, I don't know if they're going after the RX10 with the DL 24 to 500, but they've got three. So they got the 18 to 50, 1.8 to 2.8. 1-inch sensor on all of these. They have a 24 to 85, 1.8 to 2.8, and then the 24 to 500, 1.8 to 2.8. Or no, 1.8 to, or I don't have the aperture for that one, but
the 2.8 to 5.6.
Okay, yeah. So, which definitely would not take a shot of the RX10 because that's a smaller zoom and a constant 2.8. So
right.
But yeah, we have to see the size, because like we were saying with 1-inch sensors, the only reason why you would really go with a 1-inch sensor is because it's smaller, so you'll get a smaller camera.
Yeah.
And with the RX100, you can literally put it in your shirt pocket and pull it out, and you've got this killer sensor on a tiny little body.
Exactly.
And so we'll have to see how big these are, but I think they're pretty killer. I mean, it looks like they're making a legit attempt at trying to at least take down the RX100. And I think the 24 to 85 is like $650, which is.
That's what I was just looking at. Yeah, it's actually a really good price.
Yeah, that's a really good price. You're not getting any type of viewfinder,
right?
But you get a really large, bright screen, which, if you have if you're not going to have a viewfinder, have a really good screen.
Yeah.
And it looks like maybe these do. And most people these days that are just getting it for this aren't really professional photographers, and you can take most of your photos just by pointing and shooting. So
right.
And
it looks like here, everywhere I'm looking on these pictures, that and this might not be such a good thing compared to the RX100, is that when the camera is turned off and it's at its smallest, that lens is still poking out quite a ways, whereas the RX100 retracts all the way into the body.
Yeah, it goes all the way into it. Yeah, right. So that's true. And the 24 to 500 does have a viewfinder, but the other two don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I mean, it definitely looks bigger. It's got a grip on it, so
right.
With the RX100, it's literally just a tiny little, point and shoot type of thing.
I think what's going to sell these are the people that want to go with a familiar brand, want to stick Nikon, and the two selling points, in my opinion, are going to be the price is pretty good. They finally make those screens that come up above, so you can actually do like a selfie mode type thing, and then 4K video recording. That's big.
Yeah, it does have 4K. That's pretty hot. So that's it'll be good. And if they're using maybe the same sensor as the RX100, then that would be pretty killer. I know these are 20 megapixels, I think.
Yeah, yeah, 20.8 megapixels, and
the same as the RX 100. So
yeah.
if the picture quality is okay, then these will be pretty good. But I mean, you could still probably get an RX 100 Mark III for fairly cheap used, and would probably be as small. Now, another good thing about these is it looks like it does have way more manual controls.
Yes.
So if you want to shoot manual on here, a lot of them I think have a focus ring, and they just have more manual control. It looks like it has a standard like PASM dial mode on them.
Yeah,
so,
it does.
Yeah, so you are looking at a little bit more of a manual type of thing, whereas the Sony RX 100 is literally mainly supposed to be a point and shoot using their auto.
Right.
Because I've navigated their menus pretty well, and without at least one or two dials to use, it's going to be hard to shoot manual in that.
That's true. So yeah, so that could be a selling point, that it is around the same size and it has those manual controls. I see the hot shoe is on the far end of the camera, and it looks like the reason they put the hot shoe instead of in the middle on the far end is because they do sell an optional viewfinder that you can stick onto that hot shoe.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, of course, 24 to 500 comes with a viewfinder.
Right.
Yeah, the others, yeah. Because I thought about doing that on my NEX 5R, but I was like, I mean, it was $250 for the electronic viewfinder at that time, and it was massive. And it's like, get rid of the whole point of having this tiny camera if I throw a viewfinder on there.
Right.
So I think if you're going to have these things, embrace not having a viewfinder and use the hot shoe maybe for a flash, because it has a built-in flash, which it looks like you can move around and maybe shoot off the wall if you need to. But if you're going to have a flash and you won't really want to use these. But I mean, really, if somebody's buying these, they're probably not putting a flash on there. They're probably not using it with all these extra gear. They're probably just going to go out hiking or go out with family and just end up taking some really good photos with it. So
yeah, I think this is going to market really well to the dad that wants to get a family vacation, type camera for his family, and at a decent price, under $1,000, and walk away with 4K video and a 20 megapixel sensor.
Yeah, so you're definitely getting more value for your money now, especially with 4K video. I mean, again, but it's almost to the point, though. I mean, I really have to see the size of these things, because you're almost getting to the point where the next 2 years of smartphones might equal image quality of these types of cameras.
Right.
So it's like these things better get either bigger sensors or much better photos, because if you're going to do 1 inch, I think just go small like the RX 100, so you can just literally throw it in your pocket with your iPhone. And
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think especially as fast as technology in general is moving, I actually think, and we're probably going to talk about this in an upcoming episode as a whole topic, but I definitely think that compact cameras as a whole are going to be, I mean, they've obviously been dying since like 2011, if you look at some of the statistics, just because of smartphones. And so who knows how much longer they're going to be around, as our phones get better and better.
Well, especially with, looking at the next, because I think the next iPhone will probably have the biggest jump in camera quality of any smartphone camera ever, because it looks like they're probably going to be doing the dual lens system that they bought from the those Israeli company they bought. What was it called? I think Lynx or something like that.
Uh-huh.
That could combine 4 smartphone cameras to create DSLR quality. They always say, quote, DSLR quality pictures, but I mean, when you zoom in, it's never really, it looks fantastic on that screen on Instagram, on Facebook, but it's, it compares. But, and it's also sort of like the L16. Did you ever see it's not out yet, but the L16 camera, it has, I think it has like 14 cameras or something like that, 14, 15 cameras. It might be 16, L16, but they're all at different focal points. And so it can take it can zoom in, it can go back, it can have really low depth of field. It can do all these things because it has all these different cameras on it, and it's the size of a point and shoot. And the software on it is like incredible. But it's not out yet, so nobody really knows how well it's going to look. Some of their pictures may look like they have a little bit of noise in them. But yeah, once those start to get just a little bit better, point and shoots might just be on their way out.
Yeah. Well, so unless you have anything else to touch on to close it out, I think that there's one other feature that I saw that Olympus just came out with not too long ago, and I've seen a lot of people say that this might happen in cell phones eventually, or smartphones. Olympus has these 16 megapixel or 18 megapixel mirrorless micro Four Thirds cameras, and on the last two that they've come out with, one of them is like the OMD EM5 or something, Mark II. And what they do is there's a setting on there called high res shot. And if you set the camera up on a tripod and you click high res shot, the sensor itself, almost like a stabilization type thing, it will shift side left, right, up, down, and it will take a 40 megapixel photo.
So it's sort of like simulating a larger sensor,
right,
by using advanced software to move the sensor and sort of like, it's
almost like stitching together their own megapixels. Yeah,
it's like doing an in-camera panorama. Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. I mean, I know, I've not heard. I know that there was one smartphone that put a 1-inch sensor in it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was one of those sort of like, let's see if we can do it type of things. They sold it like in Europe or something like that, and whatever. I know LG, I think, put out a smartphone that I think was like the L10 or something like that apparently has or the V10, I think, that has like an insane camera. But none of these are really in the major flagship phones. I think the iPhone will probably be the next big one. The Galaxy S7 just got released, and they actually lowered their megapixel rate from 16 to 12 to have better low light. And they're
about time.
Yeah, they're taking really good pictures apparently. So, but I still think the software on the iPhone's I had an Android phone, and the HTC One M8, and I actually liked the M8 because it had the little depth sensor.
Yeah.
So it would try and cheat and do the little do what the Lytro cameras would do, where it would detect depth and it would allow you to focus afterwards. It was a little janky, but it's like you got to admire them for trying.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that would be killer if somebody figures out, because the sensors can only get so big in these smartphones. So if they do start doing like combining cameras, like the iPhone will supposedly have 2 cameras on it that will allow it to detect different types of depth and to have about a 3x optical zoom on there. That'd be
amazing.
That'd be pretty killer. And I think it would also allow them to, so this we'll put it in the show notes, this Israeli company and their website and some of the technology that they had, but it allowed, having the more cameras allows them to detect depth better and sort of scan these objects in 3D, and allows them to do these special software things where it can just have better, I don't know. It's
wow.
It's crazy. So, but when you see, like, it's definitely, smartphones seem to have better technology as far as software goes, because it's just way more advanced when it comes to that. So it'll be interesting in the next few years.
Yeah, that's very cool. All right, well, it was a good discussion on stuff. We covered mirrorless cameras, DSLR, full frame versus cropped, and the DL cameras. Do you have anything else you want to touch on before we wrap it up?
We covered everything.
All right. Sweet. Well, then thank you, everyone, for watching, and we will catch you next week for episode 3. Take care, everyone.
See you.